So I'm very glad to have the opportunity to host this panel of the Aalto Science Institute opening event on the topic of path-breaking multidisciplinary science. So Prof.Robin Dunbar, who just gave us a wonderful talk on his very successful multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary multidisciplinary agenda. So he's a professor of evolution and anthropology at Oxford University, and as you learned from the talk, so his principal research interest is in social evolution of mammals and the ways in which ecology, behavior, cognition, and neurobiology interact. He's a fellow of the British Academy, and he has several other honors, one of the recent ones being an honorary doctorate from Aalto University, for which we are very happy to have you. So the next panelist is Professor Fortnow, who is a professor and chair of the School of Computer Science at the Georgia Institute of Technology, one of the top CS schools in the United States. His research interests are in computational complexity and its applications to economic theory. He's a fellow of the AScI, which is the major American scientific body on computing. He's the founding editor-in-chief of the AScI Transactional Computation Theory, and he has served on several positions of responsibility, including chairing this AScI Special Interest Group on Algorithms and Complexity Theory, and he currently serves in the US Computing Research Association Board of Directors. So this is the national collaborative organ of the American computer science departments. Then is Professor Ilkka Hanski, who is an academic professor in mathematical ecology at the University of Helsinki. He originated a new field of metapopulation biology, which is concerned with the biology of spatially structured populations and the kind of mathematical and modeling issues and the applications to kind of fragmented natural habitats in this area. So he's an elected member of 9 science academies, including the British Royal Society and the US National Academy of Sciences. And he has also served in various scientific advisory bodies and agencies, including the European Research Council, the European Academy's Science Advisory Council, etc. So next we have Professor Ari Laptev, who is a professor of mathematics at the Imperial College in London and also director of the Institut Mittag-Leffler in Stockholm, which is an internationally renowned mathematics research center in Stockholm. His research area is, I hope I don't represent this too erroneous if I say the spectral theory of partial differential equations, close enough, okay. He's past president of the, or he was still this year the president of the European Mathematical Society. Okay, so recent past president of the European Mathematical Society. He's council member of the London Mathematical Society, executive committee member of the Institute Association, International Association of Mathematical Physics, etc. He's also the editor-in-chief of Acta Mathematica, which is one of the absolutely top mathematical journals, on Archiv für Mathematik, deputy editor-in-chief of Journal of Spectral Theory, and editor on several other mathematical journals. And then we have Professor Santo Fortunato, who is an recently hired associate professor last year, associate professor at Aalto University, Department of Biomedical Engineering and Computational Science. And Santo works in this interesting multidisciplinary area on the general theory of complex networks and their use for this study of information and biological networks to social dynamics. So I'm very glad to have all of you here. And well, the theme of this panel is, okay, so maybe I'll go to my next slide. So the theme of the panel is path-breaking multidisciplinary science. And so now we all know how important the multidisciplinary research is to address the new challenges that science and nature and society are facing. But but there are many kind of new questions introduced in trying to pursue this kind of research agenda as compared to the disciplinary research directions in which many of us are trained in and are pursuing. And now we are in the business of establishing this new multidisciplinary research initiative here called the Aalto Science Institute, and we would very much like to have your views on what are the opportunities and what are the challenges in pursuing this kind of research. So this would be advice for one to the Science Institute, secondly to maybe to the university and funding agencies, how should they kind of support, facilitate this kind of research, and maybe thirdly for the researchers themselves. So if you are interested in going in a kind of or excited about some multidisciplinary direction, so what can you expect and what pitfalls should you avoid? So I gave the panelists a few tentative questions to think about when they formulate their as a basis for discussion of the panel, but you are absolutely not bound to these questions. So there is what I won't read the questions aloud because for the sake of time. So I think we have a limited time for the panel. We are, let's say, 45 minutes to maybe 1 hour. Well, let's try to keep this to one hour. And the scheme is that I would ask the panelists first to give kind of a 5 to 7 minute review of what they think are the key issues and what they feel are the most important points to raise. And then we have open discussion following that, and we'll possibly also then take some questions from the audience towards the end. So without further introductory work, so maybe we just go in the order of the desk here. And so Professor Dunbar, please.
Thank you. I thought I just might kind of reflect really on my experience having worked in several similar kinds of freewheeling blue skies research groupings, really. It really goes back to my very early postdoc experience in the King's Research Centre in Cambridge, where we were the sociobiology project, as it was then. And since then, I have another multidisciplinary, that was slightly less multidisciplinary perhaps than the later projects. I had a big collaborative project with a bunch of mathematical economists called the AScI project, which succeeded in making British Telecom bankrupt, so they had to sell off O2. We designed the automated auction software when they sold off the second wave of air licenses, radio licenses, which became the basis for the big surge in mobile phone technology back in the, when was it, early 90s sometime. And British Telecom won, but they had to pay so much for it, they had to sell off the O2, which was their mobile phone division, to pay for it. The British government was very happy. I think before that they'd only earned about £1 million a time whenever they auctioned the radio licenses altogether, and I think they made something like 15 billion out of it. It was a fantastic. They were very pleased with scientists for a while. But that was a very multidisciplinary group of psychologists, anthropologists, and mathematical economists, and then after that a project on human evolution, the Lucy project. Both of these are about 30, 35 people involved altogether. It was a collaboration between evolutionary biologists, evolutionary psychologists, social psychologists, and archaeologists on human evolution. And then I've just started a new 3-year project from a research centre in my college on trying to understand the cognition, the psychology of drama what the dramatist and the audience are actually doing. It's a collaboration between English literature people, Shakespeare people, classicists, and myself as the psychologist. So I've done a lot of these things, and I find them unbelievably productive. That's not including all the EU network projects, which have mostly been with physicists. All these have been hugely productive and exciting for me, because it's allowed me to collaborate with people who I wouldn't normally probably have collaborated with, who brought in a whole new toolkit. But I think the success of it is two things. I think one is having a common goal of what the project is about. There's a kind of, the community has a goal of where they're trying to get to or what they're trying to do. But at the same time, lesson here for the administrators, very light touch. So the best projects have been the ones where the project directors have not tried to micromanage the project. So I was involved in one EU network project, which was a complete disaster, because the person who had the money, as it were, the host, the chief host, whatever they call it, tried to micromanage the whole project, including everybody else's postdocs, and it just was a complete mess. In fact, it was such a mess, the EU, Brussels refused to pay the last quarter of money because it had been so bad. But the others had very, very good dynamics, and the key to it is the social dynamics, I think. It's not just me with my social networks hat on, but me with my experience. And the key to that is actually, in some sense, living and breathing together. And I always come back to this one example. It's a slightly tongue-in-cheek example. But when Max Perutz set up the molecular biology lab in Cambridge back in about 1957, molecular biology didn't exist at that point hardly. The British Research Councils made this commitment. They set this place up for molecular biology in Cambridge. And Max Perutz insisted that there was a very good quality restaurant there that was free, cafeteria that was free, because he said people will only talk to each other if over food. If they come in, and they will come in if it's free, but they won't come in if they have to pay. You might think this. They will talk to each other. You can't make people collaborate. You can't make people do science together. All you can do is provide the opportunity, right? And the way to do that is to provide a social context in which they will come and talk informally with each other. And out of that, some novel ideas and collaborations across disciplines will grow. And my proof of evidence for that is that institute has 9 Nobel Prizes. Sorry, 13 Nobel Prizes, I beg your pardon. 13 Nobel Prizes. What more evidence do you need?
All right, thanks. I'd like to give a little background about myself so you know where I'm coming from. So my research area is computational complexity. I'm interested in the power or lack thereof of efficient computation. And although I got my PhD in applied math, I consider myself primarily a computer scientist. But in the past, I've worked with mathematicians and physicists and biologists and most recently economists. Although I want to be careful, I don't really want to say I've done true interdisciplinary work. It's more like, sort of the questions on, the power of computation is something that, just happens to permeate a lot of different fields. So I just only have these discussions and occasionally end up on papers. So I want to talk a little bit about what I think are the challenges of interdisciplinary work, which I think we just have to find ways to get around. And some of this is maybe something we could do in this institute. Some of these things are just broader issues. One big one, for example, is culture. I find that different fields actually view the world, not just their own research, but actually view the world through the lens of the field that they're in. So I tend to view the world computationally. Economists tend to view the world maybe with incentives and trying to optimize situations and so on. So it's really, it's something that you actually have to kind of get used to. You mentioned eating. I found that the best way to learn to deal with economy, to learn how to think like economists was not to go, I went to lots of lectures, but the real best thing to do is just have lunch with them. So once a week for a long time, I would go and have lunch with economists and just listen to not that we talked economics or computer science, just talked about the world, but to see the world through their eyes, it's kind of a different view. There's other issues. We publish in different ways. We have different terminology. The word efficient means something completely different for computer science and economics. But I think one other really big issue is the goals. Computer science has a certain goal, try to make computation better. Economics has a different goal, and not only do we kind of have different goals, but it's very hard to describe the goal of your field to another field. Inherently you've grown up, spent 20, 25 years dealing with computation, and I kind of have this understanding and feeling for it and why it's important, and it's really hard to explain that to someone in a different field, and I think the same thing happens vice versa. And the problem is, we often go into interdisciplinary research thinking, well, I know the goals that, I think I know what economists ought to be doing, and I'll use my tools to do it, or vice versa, and it doesn't really work. So I find that to be a big issue, is that our goals aren't necessarily the same, and you need to kind of take time to figure out what the other side really wants so you can try to make a good interdisciplinary research. Another big issue is just community. It's when I actually tell young people, junior people, it's generally a bad idea for, I would say, an assistant professor or a postdoc or something like that to try to get heavily involved in disciplinary research. Because the problem is, if you try to do something truly interdisciplinary, it becomes hard to sell. Can you sell yourself as a computer scientist? Can you sell yourself as an economist? And often you might be doing good work, but it might be really hard unless the right people are there to be able to sell yourself in one department or another. So it becomes a very risky thing to do. Some people have done it very successfully. I don't want to say it's not been done, but it's also, for a young person, it's a huge risk to take. And once you have tenure, it's a lot easier to do this sort of thing. But before you have tenure, I find it to be a very kind of risky thing to do. And there's still a lot of it. What's so notes I have? Oh yeah, just go to lots of talks, read lots of papers, challenge your own beliefs about what you think is important, because other fields are going to find other things to be important, and you almost have to unlearn some of the beliefs that you do have in order to find the things that work the best. The areas where I've seen the most success, there's two kinds of, I think, true success in disciplinary research. One is where you work together on a project, and you have different goals, but they're very well aligned. So quantum computing is a good example, where computer scientists and physicists both work on quantum computing. What they do is completely different, but they both have this kind of goal of making these new machines that will be able to do things that traditional computers can't do. They're a long way from doing that, but they do work very well together because they have this sort of common goal, and there are some common threads in between them. Robotics, I find, is another interesting case where typically, I've heard it doesn't really happen this way in Aalto, but typically it's a combination of computer science and mechanical engineering. Where again, you have two different sides of people trying to create robots that do something, and they're able to work together because they have this common goal. The ideal, I think, the ultimate goal of interdisciplinary research is actually to create a new field. So network science is something, for example, that I believe is starting to become its own field. Bioinformatics is clearly now it's its own field that sort of neither biologist or computer scientist can really go. It's really like its own separate entity. And I would say even computer science itself. My field started came out of both the math and the engineering community and started to become its own field in the 60s. So that's kind of my view. I think there are a lot of challenges. There's a lot of great things that come out of interdisciplinary research, but you have to kind of fight the system, fight your own beliefs, and if you really want to make it, and really be humble, probably the biggest thing. Yeah, you really have to realize that the way computer scientists think is not the only way, not the only game in town. So you really have to keep your mind open. Okay, thanks.
I feel that I'm a little bit an outlier in this panel because I actually represent a discipline which is not represented in Aalto University. I'm an ecologist, evolutionary biologist, conservation biologist, a life scientist. And also I'm an outlier in the way that I haven't been engaged in a huge amount of multi or interdisciplinary research myself. I have a couple of cases and I will mention one of those. I think the first point I would like to mention is sort of related to what Lance just mentioned, namely many, even most disciplines actually are in constant flux of being changed. They are not staying the same. Like if I take my own area, ecology, evolutionary biology, and if I take my own research group, we have researchers, principal investigators, postdoc students whose background is very different. We have actually people whose training is in mathematics and computer science, and two of our senior researchers, they actually come from what used to be the technical university, which now is Aalto. So they don't have any training in biology, yet they are now doing research in our research group, and they are part of what we might now call theoretical or mathematical ecology. So it's kind of sub-discipline of what is our main discipline. We have people whose training is in molecular biology and genomics, bioinformatics, and they are now part of our community. And we now have a sub-discipline, often, or it's kind of emerging sub-discipline called ecological or evolutionary genomics. So it's kind of part of our discipline, but it has been merging, it has been moving in a way that is kind of assimilating knowledge, and not only knowledge, but also people and expertise and development from other disciplines. Yet another example, we have people working in conservation biology. They are now geographers and even a social scientist in this research group. So even life sciences, social sciences are getting together. There is a new discipline, might call a discipline called sustainability science, which is looking at complex ecological, social, economic systems. So it's in a sense, it's also part of my discipline, but it's moving. It's a kind of in a continuous flux. Now, if you think about real sort of multidisciplinary research, where researchers or maybe even students coming from different disciplines are getting together to do something together, I think we have to realize that there is a diversity of these sorts of exercises, and we may define the different types of multidisciplinary research projects in various ways. And I think one sort of fundamental distinction is whether it's sort of bottom-up or top-down. Now, the bottom-up multidisciplinary research projects, they happen because individual researchers, they get together. And they define the goals, they figure out the purpose, the idea. And I've been very lucky myself to have been involved in one such absolutely bottom-up research project over the past 3 years, which has to do with the relationship between environmental biodiversity, which is sort of my area, human commensal microbiota, and allergies and other inflammatory diseases. Here you have a group of people whose background is in ecology, environmental science, microbiology, molecular biology, genomics, bioinformatics, statistics, allergy studies, hardcore immunology. And this has been really exciting type of multidisciplinary collaborative work, I think, for all of us. It's not that we are having lunches together. Actually, the feeding part that Robin was emphasizing is not part of this, but we just, all of us feel that we are sort of opening up a kind of completely new set of questions and almost like a new horizon for our own research, that this is the reason why we are so excited about it. Now, these bottom-up sort of projects, they typically are focused on basic research. The opposite oftentimes is the case with the top-down multidisciplinary projects or programs which are initiated by institutes or funding agencies. And oftentimes they are focused on more applied questions. Oftentimes they are less successful for the simple reason that individual researchers, they're kind of drawn in and they are forced to make a commitment beyond their existing commitments for research, teaching, whatever you do. Now they may succeed, but I think we all have some experiences of cases where you just have a group of overcommitted people doing something because there's a funding opportunity, and the chances there are oftentimes chances of succeeding are much less than if the actual initiative comes from the researchers. Now, a sort of middle way here, which I think is what the funding agencies and institutions should be thinking about, is not to sort of define the goals of the multidisciplinary research for the researchers, but just to facilitate that sort of research, and then try to find ways for the researchers themselves to come up with the actual questions. And I do have the feeling that this is what the Aalto Science Institute is about in doing, not perhaps so much of defining what should be the next multidisciplinary research initiative, but you know, facilitating researchers, in other words, you to figure it out. And also like Robin mentioned, the EU networks, oftentimes they also belong to this category. There is some broad topic in the call, but then, you know, it's a competitive call, and the researchers themselves are supposed to come up with the specific topics. Finally, I make one comment about the evaluation of interdisciplinary research. I've been quite a bit involved with the European Research Council in terms of actually doing research paid by the Research Council, but also being involved with the evaluations. And there's a sort of funny bias, which is not due to the agency itself, because the European Research Council is really committed to support multidisciplinary research. That they want to do that. However, in the panel meetings, the individual researchers, oftentimes, they are struggling to properly and fairly evaluate multidisciplinary research projects. Oftentimes, the individuals, they tend to evaluate and look at their particular project and proposal from their own disciplinary perspective, failing to realize that you know, if such a project is evaluated from n different disciplinary you know, angle perspective, it's very likely that this proposal or project will fail, simply because you can't do you know, everything at the same time. So there is certainly there's a bias, but at the same time, as we all know, many institutes and agencies, they are very supportive, and so there certainly is an opportunity even for younger researchers to succeed. But like Lance was saying, there are also risks involved, and I would say that you should not engage in a project unless you really feel yourself that this is something that is so close to your own research interests that you want to do it for that reason.
Let me make some comments too. Now, first of all, I would like to congratulate you, Aalto University, with this achievement that you had this idea to build up this so-called, from my point of view, kind of institute for advanced study, where you have this interdisciplinary project. So, and it's and the second is that you already achieved something which I think is very good. I read the report, and it's very interesting development, and I wish you all success for the future. Now. I'm also very glad that mathematics is involved. I mean, I'm represented here, mathematics, and I'm very happy that mathematics is one of the core areas of which was included into Aalto Science Institute. Because mathematics, as we say in KTH in Stockholm, that mathematics, I mean, the whole KTH is doing mathematics basically. I mean, it's just applied or pure, that is a different story, but mathematics is everywhere. And say at Imperial College, most of our graduates, they go to financial market and they go to city. And it's not only from UK university they go to city, they go to city from all over the world. Anyway, so, and then really banks appreciate, for example, banks appreciate mathematics education very much. Now, you have a very important task, and you have to prove that it's possible to do what you're planning to do. I mean, of course, for example, speaking about interdisciplinary institute of such a caliber as you try to achieve, it's not that simple. I mean, I know many mathematical institutes in Europe. In Europe, for example, there are about 30 research institute in mathematics, which are doing both applied and pure mathematics. And it's, they are sort of organized in even a committee, ERCOM committee within European Mathematical Society. But I mean, what you're trying to build is a really interdisciplinary thing. Now, these institutes which we have in mathematics, they are very international. They really attract people from all over the world, and then basically, if there are openings, then the best people in the world get such a position, those who are interested, of course. So you really have a problem, I think, so you really might have a problem of survival. And in order to survive, you really have to attract best people. And how to do it, and also you have to have collaboration. From my point of view, very important that you have a collaboration with already existing structures within, say, Aalto University, for example. Because for mathematics, if you have a postdoc in mathematics, I think it has to be coordinated somewhat with the departments, because eventually, if you have your separate life, I mean, that's not going to work properly. And of course, it would be a source, and this kind of collaboration would be very important for both sides. Now, for example, a couple of years ago, I was in a panel of evaluating the institutes in the United States, in Washington and NSF. And then there was an application from Institute for Advanced Study. It's a very famous institute. It was built in 1933. And then they applied for $20 million for 5 years, a kind of standard amount. And there was complaint. Most of this money was supposed to go to postdocs. But these postdocs they have at the Institute Advanced Study, it's kind of a critic. There is a critic there because they come and there is nobody to take care of them. I mean, sort of it's good to have it in their CV that they were in Princeton, but otherwise you have to work with your postdoc, with your graduate students. You have to, and in order to provide such work, you have to have collaboration between the all kind of institutes you have within university and then within probably even outside bodies. Now, for example. Again, Nordita was mentioned here today, but Nordita is also Institute for Physics, and it's again, it's very focused. I mean, here you would like to build something very different. You would like to have really a broad institute with a sort of really multidisciplinary. Now, so what I suggest also that sort of to do that, you may have certain sort of things. For example, you can have high-profile conferences in order to attract people from all over the world. And then eventually what happens is, according to my experience, people come and then they see how it works out. You have contacts for postdocs and for graduate students. Extremely important to have contacts with the high-profile people, because that's the future. That's how you build a relationship. And then in many ways, when you apply for a position, personal relationship play a very, very important role. And if somebody knows you personally, that's what we do at Institut Mittag-Leffler. Institut Mittag-Leffler in Sweden, in Stockholm, it's where the postdocs meet established mathematicians, established professors, and then they have personal relationship, and that's how the career goes on. I think this is a very important part. And then the way how you can do it, you have this fantastic program of inviting guest professors, and also I would think that conferences, guest professors might not be able to come for, I mean, many high-profile people now are too busy to come for 2 or 3 months maybe, but for 1, 2, 3 months. But they can come to conferences, and then you can build it up. Then the next thing is that it's you have to have a collaboration with industry, as far as I understand, because For example, I sort of initiated a project within European Science Foundation on mathematics in industry. It was very successful, and this sort of took off, and then people in applied mathematics now are talking to people from industry. They are building now associations, which I think are going to play a very important role in the future. Now, one thing which they do also, for example, there is a Applied Math Society in France. It's a Applied Math Society called SMI, and also there is another society which is AScI. What they do, they build up, they have regular schools where they invite, where you have young scientists, even at postdoc level, and also you invite people from industry. So people come and then they present their problems, and then they try to solve the problems on the spot. So it's like having 2-3 weeks meetings with industry, and then with the people you have here. I mean, postdoctoral positions you have, postdoc which you have here, the Aalto Science School. Now, also, one last thing which I would like to mention is that, in mathematics, there is this program which is a PDI. So, Research Institute, which I mentioned, some of them, they have a joint postdoctoral program. And that sort of gives an international impact to such kind of programs. And I would think that it would be good to have for your postdoctoral program sort of in collaboration with some other institutions. And I would be able, for example, to offer 1 or 2 postdocs position at the Institut Mittag-Leffler in mathematics. And of course, it would be such postdocs would be chosen in collaboration between, say, Aalto and the Institut Mittag-Leffler.
Is it working? Yeah, okay. So, when I realized that I was going to be the last of the panelists to give the statement, I thought of some sort of synthetic, profound statement I could make, which is, I agree with everything that my esteemed colleagues have said so far. Because the chance of saying something really original at this point was very, very low. But that's why I have a long list of points, so I hope that some of them survive. So let's see. I guess that the main reason why I was put in this panel is that some of the people here wanted to put me under pressure, which is, I can say they succeed. And that because I am a multidisciplinary scientist, whatever that means. But of course, everybody has a mother and a father, so I was born as a nuclear theorist, then I became a particle theorist, then I became a statistical physicist. Now I'm a complex system scientist, whatever that means. So the first take-home message is to the young guys in the audience, don't do that, right? It was already mentioned. It's a very dangerous thing to do when you're young. Then again, we know also that most of the progress in science comes from people, in their early stages of their careers. So, some of them must do that, must take this chance, even if, of course, it could endanger their careers. And what drives the whole thing is the thing that drives all scientists, which is passion. So, by doing multidisciplinary research, like complex systems, for instance, which is becoming very big now, fortunately, but many years ago some people wouldn't bet so much on this, you lose perhaps a little bit of career certainty, but yet you compensate with an additional surplus of passion, for what you do, for what you would like to do. A success story in this is complex networks. When I was in Indiana, at Indiana University, we organized the very first conference in network science, which is called now AScI, generated a series of conferences, which is now the main conference in this topic. I was, of course, a postdoc there, and a group of Alessandro Vespignani was one of the chief organizers of this event, and we put together a bunch of, between 100 and 200 people. 7 years later, the conference, which took place this year in Copenhagen, managed to collect about 500 people. And actually, I couldn't go. It could have been easily 501. So it was actually a much wider basin of attraction. And the distribution of disciplines within this audience is very heterogeneous. Of course, there is always a driving force. It's difficult to say in complex systems. Of course, being a physicist, I tend to say that perhaps we play a major role in this transition. But in the meantime, it's much easier to see, much easier than just 5 years ago, to see people from the social sciences, from economics also joining these events, even if, they don't know very much the people, except perhaps by reading papers, so they have finally the chance to meet them in person. What are in general the benefits of doing multidisciplinary science, except endangering your career, so giving yourself a tough time? I would say that it accelerates progress, especially when you come in contact with different communities, you put them together, because, when I used to be in particle physics, there was a kind of theorem, which was saying that whatever you did, there is always a Russian who did it 20 years before you. Because in particle physics, especially in theoretical particle physics, and I think probably math, that's pretty true. There is a friend of mine who rediscovered the result, which was proposed by some guy in 1800 something. And he realized this 2 days before submitting the paper. So what we need is much more communications between the various areas, because sometimes we're simply not aware that there are people doing what we want to do, and they can do it better than what we can contribute. Not because necessarily they're better, but because they have better instruments you should also know, and that you may not be aware of. So, and this creates a practical problem, especially now that you are overflown by papers, venues, events, and we have still 24 hours a day. Sometimes we have also to eat and sleep, so it's impossible to read all the proceedings of all conferences, all the journals that might be vaguely relevant, even if something really important can be published in any of these things. So from the point of view of implementation, it would be very good if one could design portals which would allow people to get in touch, to find out immediately if there are some keywords that they're interested in, where, for instance, papers with specific indications about potential topics you might be interested in are published, and not 10 years after that, instantly. There are people who are trying to think about that, and actually, I was asked to join this effort. So, let me see what we have here. Yeah, so speaking still about implementation, really, what can an institution like university, Aalto, or anything else do to promote multidisciplinary science? Of course, I spent some time in the States, and I guess many people here have done it, so they can, I think, compare it to models. I don't think I offend anybody by saying that European institutions are a little more frozen and a little less adaptive than American institutions, although, of course, you can always do better, even in the States, of course. So in my experience, what I know is that, of course, this is a big community, but that many people contributing to this community are still strongly, eradicated in their own traditionally disciplinary and sometimes even orthodox department. And they don't have an easy life there. Their colleagues say, why did you stop doing real stuff and doing this crap now? It's not so easy even inviting people, because, of course, if you invite, then, make a very nice seminar, you invite a guy that you esteem, that you respect, it may be kind of uncomfortable to give a seminar in front of people that think that what you're doing is not nice, or it's not even fun, or it's not physics, simply. So I say, why are you staying in the physics department if this is not anymore related to that? So what to do to avoid that? Creating things like, for instance, the Aalto Science Institute and the like, offering institutional opportunities to scientists who want somehow to cross the boundaries and get, search for their soulmate in a different area, to get together on a regular basis and to work on common projects. The last thing, since it's still related to that, of course, to do research, you can invest as much time as you want, but still you need, of course, people, so you need funding. It was already mentioned that the current model has some strong deficiencies, and I can vouch for that, because, despite how much formally something like the European Research Council, but also even the Academy of Finland here, can promote multidisciplinary research in words, at the end, there are, whatever you do, whatever you propose to do, ends up in a panel which is more or less strongly disciplinary. Of course, there could be open-minded people, and you can have the luck to end in the hands of these people. But, of course, we say this is an advantage, so let's try to take a look at this from a different way. But you still tend to look at things in the same way, you know. And besides, this is not the only proposal you're going to read. You're reading other proposals, more traditional, which may somehow fulfill your expectations better. Even if, from the point of view of merit, they could be just equally good. So in my opinion, I mean, you know, encouraging multidisciplinary research also means creating panels to evaluate, so to take these decisions also about funding for multidisciplinary kind of projects. For people who are used to propose this kind of project themselves, and they are less scared by, you know, putting together these things. And that's pretty much everything I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you for this very inspiring round of short discussion. So I made lots of notes. So are there some immediate reactions that the panelists would like to raise? So I saw some other people scribbling on their papers too.
I just might make one comment, actually. There's mathematicians at Coventry University, a guy called Ralph Kenner, who's looked at productivity in British university departments, and basically in relation to network structure within the department. So that's very easy to do because we have the statistics are published by the review process that goes on there. And what was very interesting about that, I thought, was the effective critical masses on the productivity of departments. So if you looked at the productivity number of papers published, you know, and the quality of the papers published, because they're kind of marked and given a rating, the productivity per person in a department in every discipline increased as departments got bigger, up to a sort of plateau, and then they plateaued off, but every discipline had a plateau at a different size. The science disciplines often had a plateau at about 15. Mathematics was 1, I think. It was very clear that having a collaborative group of people who actually talk together, I think that's the burden of what almost everybody's been saying here, is the opportunity just to talk to people and bounce ideas about, and you only get that in a social context. It doesn't pay, like you said, to go and listen to lectures. You know, you really got to get inside the other discipline's skin, and even if you don't understand the maths, at least understand what they're doing. It just struck me when I saw these data that really they pointed to the importance of having a critical mass of people, a minimum critical mass. There's no point, it's a very fine balance, I think. You know, you can have too many and you're wasting your money, and you can have too few and you're wasting your money. It's just getting it right. But if you get it right, it just explodes like a kind of volcano in terms of the productivity of individuals. And I do think that's terribly important.
Okay, this was a very interesting study that we need to consider also here. But yes, Ilkka, please.
So mind you, Robin, if you have many colleagues in the department, you probably end up writing multi-authored papers. And if you just count the number of papers, everybody ends up as an author of more papers than if you are working. Oh, hopefully they do. Actually, I would like to make one other comment, which is that in some sense multidisciplinary research is not different from any other kind of research. Namely, to do it successfully, I think you have to be very clear on the research questions that you want to address. And so I think that really needs to be the starting point. What is the advantage of the multidisciplinary context is that you have a kind of broader set of questions potentially that you may address, because there's more knowledge, more skills, more expertise involved, and I think that's the excitement of the multidisciplinary context for research. But like just assuming that you bring in people together from different disciplines, then somehow something miraculous happens. I don't kind of believe on that. We still need to do the hard work of figuring out what exactly is it that we want to address with the research, regardless of whether it's disciplinary work or multidisciplinary research.
I also would like to add this. Your remark about the European Research Council, about this interdisciplinary project, I'm involved also myself very much in the ERC now as a panel member and even as the chair of mathematics for junior people studying up grants. And so indeed, it's very difficult to get through multidisciplinary project. And in the end, I mean, they canceled it right now. I mean, there is no money special. There used to be special money for interdisciplinary project, but they cancel it now. And the thing is, on one hand, it's true. On the other hand, it's not quite true. For example, I have a good friend, Martin Gröschel, who is a secretary of the European International Mathematical Union. He's in Germany, he's in Berlin, he has a big group, and they involved, they were several projects they were involved in, extremely multidisciplinary. One of them was they made a timetable and then the passes for all buses in Berlin. And also, they also were involved in, for example, setting the mobile antenna so there would be best coverage over the whole Berlin. And of course, it's a lot of absolutely non-trivial mathematics, and I'm sure for such a project, for example, if it would be application to ERC, they would definitely get it. So it's not only that the interdisciplinary project they're very difficult to get through, but if behind this interdisciplinary project is a good science, I think it's possible. It's not that impossible.
Yeah, just a little point about the ERC, because some of you might be thinking of applying for ERC grants, and I think you should if you are in that sort of position. That's true that there is no particular sum of money anymore, as there used to be in the beginning, which was meant for multidisciplinary projects. But definitely ERC is still very much favoring multidisciplinary research, and the thinking now is that the individual panels themselves, they can deal with the multidisciplinary proposals. And I'm pretty sure that, you have a good chance if you have a high-quality multidisciplinary proposal. The multidisciplinary itself is not the selling point. It's the exciting research. But then, if you have several disciplines involved, that surely can make it the exciting proposal.
Yeah, so you're right. So it's very good to specify this. So, I mean, it's not the fact that you have a biologist, and a physicist and economist working on a common project doesn't automatically make the paper any better than if they worked independently or in any other specialized group. In terms of thinking about the success stories, what happens, in my opinion, what happens in general behind what lies behind the creation of these success stories is not necessarily a biologist and a chemist meeting together at a coffee machine during a break. The Watts-Strogas paper, which is now 20,000 plus sites, Google Scholar, there are two physicists, applied mathematicians who did something which went well beyond what they thought. But at the end, people from the very different disciplines with their own eyes and their own perspective on things say, oh, look, this is something that could be interesting for us too. So, and that's how the things open. They didn't want to solve problems in sociology, they didn't want to solve problems in biology. They tried to have some sort of common perspective on things, to use methodological tools that now everybody's using. And especially I would say if you work on methodologies, you propose a methodology, for instance, I work personally in community detection, there is not a single type of graph where this methodology is not used. People want this algorithm, so I don't care if it's at the end an economist or a biologist or an engineer who's going to use that. So, it's a methodological advance, which in this case is the added value of this.
So, I have lots of questions about the instruments and the carrier system also concerning this, but then we should take a couple of questions from the audience if you wish to raise some points for discussion. Yes, please.
So mine is a bit philosophical in the sense that very often science is defined either by what are the things it tries to solve or what are the methods that you are using. Single discipline. So very often if you look at the different disciplines, they are a combination of these two. So one doesn't, for example, mathematics is a method science in the sense, and it is essentially covering everything we do. So I don't know a science that would not contain mathematics in it, or a discipline. So in that kind of a sense, the kind of a mere question about the multidisciplinary idea is a bit vague, in the sense, so we either know how to do something or we are interested in something. And these are the two definitions on it. We could say life sciences, we are interested about how dogs are behaving, or how rabbits are copulating. So these are kind of the things that you go for. And then you may have this kind of other kind of a system. So sometimes I think that this is tied to the fact that in order to really speak about multidisciplinary, there are ideas that are so big that it is hard to understand for a single man. So in the sense, let's say so what is our ability to let's say, two big questions. So what is our ability to build something that nobody has built before? Or what is our ability to predict the future to the level that we could trust it? So these are the two questions in science. That's in science, and the other one is technology. So I would define the multidisciplinarity for kind of being able to attack these problems to a certain extent. So any reflections?
I think you're being a little unfair to mathematics in some sense. I mean, it's true that, you all use it's like you all use computers. It doesn't make you all computer scientists. I think I never buy the biography of Albert Einstein I read recently. And I mean, he certainly knew some math, when he was young. But he actually got stuck in his own research until he actually went and talked to mathematicians who said, oh, look, we've got this whole theory that lets you, express what you're doing. So he had the ideas. Without the mathematics, his theories wouldn't have been, not just the basic math, but the advanced math at the time that would actually make his theories work. So there I believe, that's where, it's the ideas, but it's also the tools. You need, it's more, you need Albert Einstein, but,
Right.
Well, it's not that you need multiple people to eventually there'll be people who would get the training in both areas. If you're becoming a physicist today, you're going to get the proper training in mathematics. You're going to need it. But back then it wasn't obvious.
Well, I would like to take a little different perspective on this issue of what then would be the really multidisciplinary questions. There could be something very, very big, which is kind of beyond our disciplinary imagination in some sense. But there are also issues like, and I'm taking an example from my current multidisciplinary research, where we're looking at the environmental effects on the microbes in our body and their interaction with our immune system. The immunologists within their discipline, they have never even thought about paying attention to the contacts of the human person with his or her natural environment. So that's kind of different perspective. It's not that they couldn't imagine that, but they just haven't thought about that within their discipline. And so bringing together that kind of new context or perspective, to me, is a multidisciplinary research. Or to take a related example from a research project from Aalto University, which I happen to know about, in the construction business, as I understand it, all the materials are now treated with biocides to get rid of all the bacteria, which means that we are having these problems with our buildings. There is no biodiversity, the sort of beneficial microbiota in our buildings, which then potentially may give an advantage to some pathogenic microbes which produce toxins, which may cause us problems. Again, I don't think that engineers who are thinking about these things, and they think it's only good to use these biocides to treat all the construction material because then you get rid of the microbes, but they haven't thought about that. It actually, inevitably we will have some sort of microbiota in our buildings. It's only a question of which kind of microbiota we have. They haven't thought about that. And so again, here there's a scope for a new perspective.
Just wanted to try to answer very shortly to what you. So your question is, I think it's a very important thing is for success of Aalto Science School is to employ and invite best people in the world, and also to I mean, to provide environment so people from different areas, different subjects would be able to talk to each other. That's what I mean.
There should be one there.
I'm just
Can you use this
gone
one?
off. I was simply going to really reinforce, I mean, I think this point has been made several times, but I actually think it's really crucial to understand. In my experience, and I think if you look at the history of science, the critical things that come out of this is the unexpected questions that other disciplines make you ask, because they're coming in with a completely different perspective and asking very naive questions sometimes, and questions which you think you just assume you know the answer to. And it's often those that make the big breakthroughs, I think. And if you like to look at the history of science, the classic case of that would be the modern atomic theory of chemistry, which was really the consequence of an accountant, for once an accountant that did something useful, trying to make equations add up, sums add up, in a way that forced a whole new view on a chemistry, which really created the modern atomic theory of chemistry, and the, sort of the rest of the chemists were heading off down the phlogiston route and going nowhere in the end. And it's just that unexpected perspective that comes in with a completely new view and just asks a stupid question. This is what I call the Dick Feynman principle in science, because he was great at doing that. He would just ask a completely naive question to which he didn't know the answer, but everybody else thought they knew the answer, and usually it put the finger on the thing that was critical. And that's what he did with the O-ring story, basically.
Okay, maybe this is actually a good note to end this panel. So I would like to thank all the panelists and the audience for an active participation. So in summary, so after all these ideas, so what we also need is, what was this? Unexpected encounters and stupid questions. And so now there's an opportunity for both. I think upstairs there is an now. Okay, so maybe let's first give a hand.
We've ended up in the internet as well. So my title is a kind of pun, really, and I think you'll see why at the end, in terms of the virtual world in terms of the internet, but it also really referring to the fact that we live in a virtual world inside our own minds, and that's actually critical to this whole enterprise.